In the distant reaches of space, humanity had spread its influence beyond Earth, colonizing new worlds, building towering cities amidst the stars. On one such distant colony, far from the bustling trade routes and military hubs, an Earthling lived a quiet life. Retired from her days of exploration, she'd settled on a fringe planet. The horizon was dotted with tall, swaying silver trees, the sky a dim shade of purple as the planet's twin suns set. Her small homestead was built from old metal scrap, the kind no one bothered to recycle anymore. Her name was Marla. Just an ordinary woman by most standards, though once she'd piloted ships through uncharted territories. Now, after years of adventure, all she wanted was peace. The homestead was enough. The quiet suited her. But that peace was shattered the day she found them. It was early morning, the air crisp, when she noticed something unusual near the edge of her property, smoke rising from beyond the ridge. She approached cautiously, her instincts from her space-faring days still sharp. What she found wasn't what she expected. A small, battered escape pod lay wrecked in the field. Its metal was scorched, and the hull was dented, as if it had survived a rough crash. Inside, two small figures lay cradled in the wreckage. They weren't human. Their skin was a pale shade of blue, thin and almost translucent, and their eyes, far too large for their small faces, blinked weakly up at her. Their limbs were slender, too fragile-looking for a species meant to survive in space. They were babies, alien in every way, yet helpless, barely clinging to life. Marla hesitated, staring down at them. She had no idea where they came from, who they belonged to, or how they'd ended up here. Part of her knew that taking them in would complicate her quiet existence. Yet, as they whimpered softly, struggling for breath, she couldn't turn away. Something stirred in her, something maternal, maybe, or simply the realization that they would die if she left them. With a sigh, she gently lifted them from the wreckage and carried them back to her home. Years passed. The twins, as Marla called them, grew under her care. She gave them names, Mira and Zed. Their differences became more apparent as they aged. Their skin stayed blue, though it darkened slightly with time. Their limbs lengthened, their eyes sharp and bright, reflecting a world Marla couldn't always understand. They were unlike any species she had encountered during her space-faring days, but that didn't matter. They were hers now. Her homestead, once quiet, was now filled with the laughter and the occasional mischief of the two growing children. Mira was the calmer of the two, always thoughtful, always observing. Zed, on the other hand, was restless, curious about everything, pushing boundaries in ways that often tested Marla's patience. Yet, despite the challenges of raising children, especially alien ones, Marla felt a warmth in her life she hadn't expected. The twins had integrated into her daily routine, learning the human ways, mimicking her speech and habits. Yet, despite their bond, Marla knew they were still different. Not just in appearance, but in ways she couldn't quite pinpoint. They struggled with the local children, who were wary of their alien features. There were days when Mira and Zed would retreat into themselves, their large eyes filled with questions Marla didn't have the answers to. But her love for them was undeniable. She had become their mother, and they were her children, no matter their origin. Still, there were moments that made her pause. Little things she couldn't ignore. Like the time Mira had reached out to touch a broken machine in the yard, and it had whirred to life without warning, despite being long out of power. Or the time Zed had fallen and cut himself badly, but his skin had healed almost instantly, the wound sealing itself in a way that was far from normal. These weren't the small quirks of alien biology. These were something else. Marla began to notice more strange occurrences as the twins grew. At night, they sometimes spoke in a language she didn't recognize, one she hadn't taught them. It was soft, almost musical, as if it belonged to another world. They'd never learned it from her, yet it came to them as naturally as breathing. There were other moments, too. Glimpses of things out of place. Once, when they were playing near the stream, she swore she saw Zed move faster than her eyes could track, almost as if he'd blinked from one spot to another. Myra's eyes, too, sometimes glowed faintly in the dark, a soft silver hue that made Marla's heart race in confusion. She never confronted them about it, not directly. She wasn't sure if they were even aware of what they were doing. But the unease grew. Who were these children she had taken in? Where had they come from? She kept her questions to herself for now, not wanting to alarm them. But deep down, Marla knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. There was more to the twins than she had first thought. Something far greater than the small, quiet life she had built with them. And whatever it was only a matter of time before it revealed itself. It started with small things, hardly noticeable at first. Mira and Zed had always been different, Marla knew that. But recently, their differences had begun to stand out in ways she couldn't ignore. Mira had developed a strange sense for things before they happened. She would know when Marla was about to come home, or when a storm was approaching long before any warning appeared on the colony's weather systems. It wasn't just a sharp intuition, there was precision to it, almost like she could sense the very shifts in the air, feel the energy of things before they manifested. Zed, on the other hand, had become impossibly fast. He'd always been the more physically active of the two, but this was something else. One evening, while playing outside, he tripped over a rock, tumbling toward a sharp drop. Marla rushed to grab him, but before she could, Zed simply blinked. 1 second, he was falling. The next, he stood on the other side of the ridge, looking bewildered. It hadn't been a run, he had been standing still, then suddenly moved, faster than her eyes could track. That night, Marla found them in their room, speaking quietly in the soft language she hadn't taught them. Their voices had that familiar lilting quality, the words flowing like music, but now, there was something in their tone, a weight, a focus. Zed's hand moved slowly in the air, tracing symbols she didn't recognize, his fingers glowing faintly with a silver light. Mira watched him with wide eyes, her own reflecting the same light. Marla didn't sleep well after that. A few days later, something even stranger happened. They had been working on the homestead, repairing an old solar panel that had stopped functioning years ago. Marla was struggling to get the rusted bolts to turn when Mira walked over. Without a word, the girl placed her hand on the base of the panel. A faint hum echoed through the air, and the lights flickered back to life, the rusted joints glowing briefly as if restored by some unseen force. Mira blinked, looking almost as surprised as Marla. "How did you?" Marla began, but Mira only shook her head, confused. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "It just happened." It wasn't long after that incident that Marla began to search for answers. She'd always wondered where the twins had come from, but now, the question gnawed at her. They couldn't just be ordinary orphans from a destroyed planet. There was too much about them that defied explanation. Late at night, after the twins had gone to bed, Marla sifted through the wreckage of their escape pod. It was old, far older than any technology she had encountered in her spacefaring days. The symbols etched on its surface weren't from any language she recognized. They were intricate, almost ceremonial in their design, spiraling out in patterns that seemed too deliberate, too specific to be random. She accessed the colony's old galactic records, poring through data archives from long-forgotten civilizations and star systems. One set of records caught her attention. It detailed the rise and fall of an ancient empire, long believed to have vanished after a brutal civil war. This empire, once one of the most powerful in the galaxy, had collapsed under mysterious circumstances. The ruling family, known for their unique abilities and ties to an ancient power, had been wiped out, or so the records claimed. But there had been rumors. Whispers of survivors. Scattered reports of royal heirs being smuggled off-world before the final battle. The records were fragmented, incomplete, but one detail stood out. The family crest of this empire matched the symbols on the escape pod. Marla's heart raced. She had been raising royalty, alien royalty, without even realizing it. She wanted to tell them immediately, but something held her back. How would she even begin to explain? She didn't understand it fully herself. Besides, the twins were already acting strange. It was as if they could sense something, too. They'd been quieter lately, more withdrawn. They spent long hours staring out into the stars, as if waiting for something, or someone. It wasn't until Zed came to her one night, his face pale, that she realized they were beginning to understand on their own. "I've been dreaming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see a place, a palace, I think. It's huge, with golden walls and these enormous trees, taller than anything here. And there are people. They look like us." Mira had similar dreams. She remembered a lullaby, one that Marla had never sung to them. The melody haunted her, a soft, sorrowful tune in the alien language. When she hummed it, Zed would sometimes join in, the words spilling from his lips effortlessly, as if they had always known them. "I think we're from somewhere else," Mira said one morning, her voice trembling. "Not just another planet. Somewhere important. Somewhere we're meant to be." Marla couldn't deny it anymore. The pieces were fitting together. The twins weren't just survivors of some random catastrophe. They were more than that, heirs to something ancient, something powerful. But with that realization came fear. If they were heirs to a lost empire, then others would be looking for them. Others who might not have such benevolent intentions. The twins, though still children in her eyes, were beginning to understand that their past was catching up to them. They weren't just alien children lost in the far reaches of space. They were royal. And sooner or later, the galaxy would come looking for its lost heirs. It began with a distant hum in the night air, unlike anything Marla had heard before. The stars above her homestead twinkled as usual, but something felt off. That strange hum grew louder, and then the ground trembled slightly. She rushed outside just in time to see the sky split open with a bright flash. A sleek, unfamiliar ship descended silently, landing just beyond the boundary of her farm. She barely had time to react before the ship's ramp lowered, and figures emerged. They weren't human. There were 4 of them, each from a different species: tall, slender beings with elongated limbs, another with reptilian scales, and a third with a shimmering, translucent form that seemed to shift like liquid. They carried themselves with a kind of authority, their eyes sharp and cold, as if they had seen lifetimes of battle and power struggles. The tallest among them stepped forward, his voice calm yet commanding. "We've been looking for them." Before Marla could respond, Zed and Mira appeared at the door behind her, their wide eyes locked onto the visitors. They didn't look afraid. It was as if they knew, deep down, that this moment had always been coming. The tallest alien spoke again, ignoring Marla and focusing on the twins. "You don't belong here," he said softly. "Your place is far from this world. You are the last of the House of Viral, the heirs to a dynasty that ruled half the galaxy. We've come for you." Marla's heart pounded in her chest. She stepped forward, putting herself between the twins and the strangers. "What do you want with them? They are not safe here." Another one of the visitors, the reptilian being, hissed. "Their bloodline holds power. Enemies know they're alive, and they will come to claim them. Or worse." The translucent figure's voice rippled through the air like a soft echo. "We've been searching for them since the fall of their empire. There are those who seek to control them, and others who would see them destroyed to ensure their power is never restored." The words hung heavy in the air. The twins stared, their expressions shifting from confusion to a strange, distant recognition. Something inside them had already known the truth. "We are protectors," the tall one continued. "We serve the loyalists who survived the coup. Your parents, they hid you for your safety before they were executed. The rebel factions feared your potential. They would have used you as weapons or killed you to solidify their claim." Marla's stomach dropped. All the strange dreams, the visions, the unexplainable powers, it all made sense now. The twins weren't just lost children. They were the key to something far bigger, something dangerous. "Your bloodline holds the power to unlock the source," the reptilian being said. "An artifact tied to the ancient energy that fueled your empire. It can rebuild worlds, or tear them apart." Zed stepped forward, his eyes locked onto the visitors. "If we're so important, why didn't anyone come for us sooner?" His voice was sharp, filled with the frustration of a child who had been left in the dark for too long. "We had to wait," the translucent one replied. "Wait for you to reach an age where your abilities would awaken, where you could decide your own fate. But the time has come. You're no longer safe here. Marla's mind raced. She looked at Mira, who had remained silent through it all. The girl's eyes were wide, her thoughts unreadable. She could see the weight of the revelation settling in, but they were still just children. And now, they were being thrust into a galactic struggle they didn't ask for. Suddenly, the sound of another ship filled the air. Marla turned, her heart sinking as she saw it, larger, more menacing, descending rapidly. The visitors tensed, their hands moving toward weapons hidden at their sides. "They've found us," the tall one said grimly. "The rebels. They're here." Everything moved fast after that. The new ship touched down with a heavy thud, and a group of armored figures poured out. Their intentions were clear: eliminate the heirs before they could be used against them. Marla could see it in their movements, the cold efficiency of assassins sent to finish what had been started long ago. One of the visitors, the reptilian, turned to Marla, his eyes hard. "You need to decide. We can protect them, but they'll never be safe if they stay here. The rebels will keep coming. They will never stop." Marla felt torn. The twins were her family, her children, and she had sworn to protect them. But this was bigger than anything she could have imagined. If they stayed here, they'd be hunted, their lives in constant danger. But if she let them go, they'd be thrown into a war for an empire they barely understood. Myra's voice broke the silence. "What if we don't want the throne?" The tall visitor knelt in front of her, his expression softening. "You don't have to take it. You can choose your own path. But the rebels will never stop unless they believe you're no longer a threat." Zed clenched his fists, looking between Marla and the visitors. "We can fight. We can stop them. But we don't know how." Marla's chest tightened. She had taught them so much: how to survive, how to live, but she couldn't prepare them for this. "We need to leave," she said, her voice steady despite the fear building inside her. "We can't stay here. If we do, they'll keep coming." The visitors nodded, their weapons now drawn as the rebel forces moved closer. "We'll take you somewhere safe," the tall one said. "But know this, the galaxy will always remember who you are. And one day, you may need to decide whether to reclaim what was taken from you, or let it burn." Marla looked at the twins, her heart aching. They were still so young, so innocent, but their world had just become infinitely more dangerous. She knew deep down that whatever choice they made would change the course of history. Marla knew she couldn't win this fight by force alone. The rebels, with their advanced technology and vast resources, outmatched anything she or the visitors could muster. But Marla wasn't one to back down. She had learned a long time ago that brute strength wasn't everything. Earth had always been outgunned, outmatched, but never outwitted. She gathered the twins and the visitors, laying out a plan. It wasn't about standing their ground in some hopeless last battle. That would be a death sentence. Instead, they'd use the terrain, the tools they had at hand, and the element of surprise. This wasn't a war they could fight with sheer firepower, but Marla knew human ingenuity was its own kind of weapon. The homestead had old tech buried in its dusty corners. Rusted drones, long-abandoned communications equipment, and outdated hacking tools from Marla's soldiering days. But with some work, these relics could be repurposed. The key was to outmaneuver the rebels, not with their own fancy gadgets, but with resourcefulness and cunning. She began modifying the drones for guerrilla warfare, small, fast, and unpredictable. They weren't built for combat, but they could be used to confuse the enemy, to make them chase shadows while the real plan unfolded elsewhere. Marla's mind raced as she pieced it together. The rebels expected to overpower them through sheer force, but they weren't prepared for the kind of creative strategies humanity had perfected over centuries of struggle. Guerrilla tactics, sabotage, misdirection, these were Earth's greatest strengths. She had fought in wars where survival depended on thinking 2 steps ahead, and that's exactly what she would do now. Meanwhile, the twins had their own part to play. Though they were the rightful heirs, they had something their pursuers could never understand: a grounding in human values. The galaxy saw them as powerful symbols, weapons even, but Mira and Zed were more than that. They had learned compassion, empathy, and resilience from their human upbringing. Marla had taught them how to fight, not just with weapons, but with their hearts and minds. As the plan came together, Marla reached out to the fringes of the galaxy, the overlooked, the downtrodden, the forgotten. Humanity had made friends in unexpected places over the years. Some were old soldiers like her, others were outcasts from alien societies. They were not powerful by any traditional standard, but they were clever, loyal, and knew how to survive in a universe that had often treated them as disposable. With diplomacy and a shared sense of purpose, Marla rallied them to her cause. The final confrontation wasn't an all-out battle on a grand scale. It was a series of coordinated strikes, small and sharp, meant to disrupt the rebels' plans at every turn. The drones, though few, acted as decoys, drawing the enemy's attention away from the homestead. Hidden traps, hacked communication lines, and misinformation spread like wildfire, throwing the rebel forces into disarray. When the rebels finally closed in on the homestead, they found nothing but empty fields and the remnants of old tech. By then, the real battle had moved elsewhere, closer to the rebel stronghold itself. Marla, the twins, and their allies had taken the fight to them, flipping the script. They weren't defending, they were liberating. The twins played their part perfectly, not by embracing the throne as a tool of power, but by using their connection to their people. In the heart of the conflict, Mira stood tall, speaking directly to the rebel forces who had come to capture her. She didn't demand allegiance, nor did she threaten violence. Instead, she spoke of unity, of rebuilding something new. Not the empire that had fallen, but something better, something rooted in the values she and Zed had learned from Marla and the life they had built on Earth. Zed, too, had his role. With his growing abilities, he created shields of energy that protected their allies, but he refused to use his power as a weapon. "We're not here to rule," he said, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "We're here to remind everyone that there's a better way." The rebel leaders were stunned. They had expected tyrants or weak children to emerge from hiding, easy to manipulate or destroy. Instead, they were faced with something they couldn't comprehend: heirs who rejected the very power they could claim, in favor of something more enduring: hope. In the end, the battle wasn't won through bloodshed or conquest. Marla's plan worked because it didn't rely on force alone. It relied on adaptability, on thinking differently, and on the human ability to unite disparate groups with a common purpose. When the dust settled, the rebels, disoriented and leaderless, were forced to surrender. Not to an emperor or empress, but to a movement they couldn't stop. As the smoke cleared and the galaxy began to understand what had happened, the twins stood side by side, both of them embracing their royal legacy, but on their own terms. They didn't want the old empire back. They wanted something new, something that would unite the people, not just through birthright or force, but through the values they had learned on Earth: resilience, compassion, and a fierce sense of justice. Marla watched them from a distance, her heart full of pride. She had raised them to be more than just survivors, more than royalty. They were a testament to what humanity could bring to the galaxy, not through domination, but through strength of spirit. In that moment, Marla realized that Earth's place in the stars was more than just another species fighting for survival. It was a beacon of something greater, something the rest of the galaxy would come to understand. The twins were proof of that. Together, they had forged a new path, one where power wasn't about who could wield it, but about how it was used. And with that, a new era began.